Facing Women Veterans panel. This panel is near and dear to my heart as a woman veteran myself. So basically the panel today will address legislative and healthcare issues facing women veterans. Along with experiences of war and transition from a female OIF veteran perspective, panelists will discuss how CIAV agencies can help meet the needs of OIF women active duty and veterans. Our panelists today are Kayla Williams, former U.S. Army soldier who served in the Middle East as an Arabic interpreter. She recounts her decision to enlist and her experiences during the Iraq War in her memoir, Love My Rifle More Than You, Young and Female in the U.S. Army. Kayla Williams was a sergeant in the military intelligence company of the 101st Airborne Division. Thank you, Kayla. We have Dr. Patricia Hayes, who is the Chief Consultant for the Women Veterans Health Strategic Healthcare Group, Office of Public Health and Environmental Hazards, Department of Veterans Affairs. In this role, she oversees the delivery of VA healthcare services for more than 270,000 women veteran healthcare users. Dr. Hayes was appointed by Secretary James B. Peake, MD, and Undersecretary for Health Michael J. Pessman, MD, as Chief Consultant, Women Veterans Health Strategic Healthcare Group, effective April 13, 2008, after having served as Acting Chief Consultant since January 2007. In the past year, Dr. Hayes has successfully worked across VHA to expand initiatives for women veterans healthcare into a broad range of areas of importance, including cardiac health, reproductive health, and birth defect prevention, and a comprehensive evaluation of care provision to women veterans. In addition, she is responsible for the acquisition and distribution of over $32.5 million in fiscal year 8 additional resources to enhance women's veterans clinical care, including additional radiology, diagnostic and clinical equipment such as mammography machines, breast ultrasound and biopsy equipment, DEXA scanners for bone density, and other specialized equipment. She recently chaired the USH work group on the enhancement of primary care to women veterans, a plan to organize women's health primary care at every VA access point. Welcome, Dr. Hayes. And then we also have Joy Ilham, a U.S. Army Service-Connected Disabled Veteran. Joy was appointed Assistant National Legislative Director of the Million Member Plus Disabled American Veterans, DAV, on August 24, 2000. Ms. Elm is employed at DAV National Service and Legislative Headquarters in Washington, D.C. As a member of the DAV's legislative team, she works to promote and defend reasonable and responsible legislation to assist disabled veterans and their families. Ms. Elm began her DAV career in 1996 as a National Service Officer at Phoenix, Arizona. In 1997, she was assigned as a National Appeals Officer at the DAV staff of the Board of Veterans Appeals in Washington, D.C., where she served until her appointment as Associate National Legislative Director in April '99. Ms. Ilham enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1982. Following basic training, she was assigned as a medic to the 67th Evacuation Hospital in Würzburg, Germany, where she underwent additional certification as emergency medical technician. She was honorably discharged from the Army in 1985. Welcome, Joy. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to the panel. Thank you all for coming.
I think I'm excited this is actually going to go fairly smoothly. We'll start with my very personal perspective and move on to a practitioner's perspective and then on to a policymaker's angle. So I think that hopefully will go fairly well. So as Tia mentioned, my name is Kayla Williams. I joined the Army in 2000. I was learning Arabic at the Defense Language Institute on 9/11, so I knew right away that my military service was going to be very different than it might otherwise have been. I was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault, and took part of the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003, stayed there for about a year. As an Arabic linguist, I got to go out on combat foot patrols with the infantry in Baghdad. And during the initial invasion, my team came under small arms fire. Later in Mosul, we were mortared regularly. I served right alongside my male peers with our flag vests on. During missions, we were all truly soldiers first. Although at first I didn't have plates because I'm just a girl. Now I think that everyone has some idea, some vague concept of what it is to be a male soldier, possibly going all the way back to the Odyssey and the Iliad. But there are very few examples of women veterans in popular culture. This has several implications. First, it became apparent when we got back from Iraq that the public just did not know or understand what it's like to be a woman in today's military. I had people ask me if I even got to carry a gun because I'm just a girl, and I had other people ask me if I was in the infantry, which if you're familiar with military culture, you know that that is simply not possible. Going out to bars when we got back, groups of friends, a lot of times the bouncer would check our military IDs and then call back to the bartender, hey, give these guys a free beer. They just got back from Iraq. And they didn't mean guys in the kind of generic gender-free mode. They literally meant the guys with the shaved heads. I never got free beers. I didn't look like a soldier. I didn't look like a combat vet. I looked like a girlfriend or a wife or a miscellaneous hanger-on. And that was challenging for me. It really, I felt in some ways degraded my my service, at least how visible it was in the regular community. The second implication is that we as women veterans have relatively few role models to turn to when we do return from a deployment or when we leave active duty. When I got back and started meeting people who were outside of the military culture completely, the only women veterans that they were aware of at all were Jessica Lynch and Libby England. And those weren't necessarily the women that I wanted representing who I am and what my service meant. And I don't entirely blame these women. The media really seized upon them and turned them into cardboard cutouts of what it means to be a female soldier. And finally, this confusion about what role women play in war today can make it more difficult to prove that problems are service connected. As most of you probably know, there's a strong correlation between exposure to combat and PTSD. But since women are supposedly barred from combat, they may face challenges proving that their PTSD is actually service connected. One of my closest friends, for example, was told by a VA doctor that she couldn't possibly have PTSD for just this reason. He just refused to accept that she could have been in combat. Now, my husband and I went on our honeymoon to Europe, and while we were in Paris, we went to a World War II exhibit. The equipment just looks so similar to our own. Some of it really hasn't changed that much. Kevlar is maybe different material, the helmets, but they look very similar. And it may sound really strange, but it wasn't until then, in 2005, in a foreign country, that I actually, for the first time, felt like a veteran, and not like just some woman who happened to go to war. And that was a very powerful and moving experience for me that I think also goes to tell us a little bit about how disconnected women veterans can feel. Another thing I'd like to mention, because women in the military are far more likely, if they are married, to be married to other service members, as I was, then that means that we may face additional or slightly different challenges as we become veterans and transition back into civilian life. For example, since women are much more likely to be primary caregivers, they may need help finding or paying for child care if they're seeking VA services. And also, women married to other soldiers may worry not just about their own readjustments, but also about their spouses and how their husbands are doing. Again, I'm not saying that men wouldn't go through that, just that because the percentages are so different, women are more likely to face those concerns. And my own husband, as I mentioned this morning, was severely injured in Iraq. That severely impacted my decision not to re-enlist because he needed help, and I didn't know who else was going to give it to him. In addition, I was so focused on his recovery that I barely even considered my own needs for several years. But at the same time, I didn't identify with Army wives who had never served, and that left me feeling doubly isolated. It was years before I realized that I, as a caregiver, needed to reach out and not just suck it up and drive on, but needed to find support for myself as well. And there can also be benefits, though, to having a dual military marriage. I feel really lucky because my husband understands why I swerve to avoid trash in the road, and he doesn't look at me funny if I flinch when I hear a loud noise. And both of us hate fireworks, so we both stay home on the 4th of July. So those shared experiences can be really positive. Now, some of the women that I served with in Iraq have confessed to me that they avoid all mention of the war on TV or in the paper. They want to totally block out all memories of their deployments and even their service because some of their experiences were so painful and difficult. And I think that's a tragedy because the time that I spend with other veterans is so important to me. It helps me to realize that I'm not alone and that many of my frustrations and emotions are perfectly normal reactions to having witnessed profoundly abnormal events. But there are still things about my own experience in a war zone that I feel that my male peers don't necessarily fully understand. They may not truly know what it's like to fear not only the enemy, but also sexual assault from your brothers in arms. And they may be aware of, but not able to fully empathize with the challenges of facing fairly regular sexual harassment. And they certainly don't understand what it's like to feel invisible as a veteran. I have to tell a story that a couple of you may be familiar with. When I went out, I was lucky enough to go out to San Francisco to a Swords to Plowshares event, and there was a major who came up to me and to a group of us and told us a story. He had been asked to go into a school and talk to the kids about what it meant to be a veteran, because the teacher felt that they just really didn't understand. She asked them to draw pictures of what a veteran is, and a lot of them drew either scenes of fighting or American flags. So the teacher felt they didn't really get it, so she asked him to come in. And he said that throughout all of this, that there was one drawing that really struck him. And he pulled it out, and it was a drawing of a really pretty girl in a uniform, in a military uniform. And now, I'm very well trained in suck it up and drive on. I can speak fairly publicly and I'm usually pretty good at holding it together. But I will admit that at that moment when I saw that drawing, my eyes filled with tears. I had to turn around and try to pull it together, because it was just incredibly emotional for me. And that was when it really hit me emotionally, instead of just, in terms of policy or what do our female veterans need, but on an emotional level, what it felt like to be invisible. The fact that it never occurred to me that a little girl would, when she heard the word veteran, draw somebody who looked a tiny bit like me. And so I'm hoping that events like this one can help bring more awareness to the complex issues that women veterans face and the nuanced nature of our experiences. I want to encourage both providers and policymakers to be more aware of and sensitive to the unique needs that women veterans have. But I also want to encourage all women veterans out there to self-identify as veterans, to take part in events, to speak up, and to make our presence known within the larger veterans community. I also encourage women veterans to participate in groups or organizations specifically devoted to women veterans, especially if due to either military sexual trauma or for any other reason, you don't necessarily feel comfortable in traditional veterans organizations. I just want everyone to know that, you're not alone, and there is a community of peers out there that's ready to offer support and understanding. Thank you.
Well, I've been working with women veterans for about 25 years, and it's just incredibly hard just to follow you. I have the distinct responsibility and passion of putting together a VA that will respond to the needs of women veterans. We have served women veterans since before Vietnam, Korea, World War II. Women have been part of the military for a very long time, including even the Civil War. But the VA, frankly, has not been inclusive of women veterans. Well, people that know me around the VA, I go around saying, "Oh, we're invisible again." In that we struggle, one of my #1 goals has been to make the VA more inclusive of women veterans. The number of women veterans is expanding extremely rapidly, and the perspective really is that in World War II, those women are now leaving VA services, but there were about 3.5% female out of the millions that served in World War II. Similar for the Korean War, even a smaller number of women served during the Vietnam era, and only 7,500 women served in country in Vietnam. And women primarily served the roles of nurses and clerks. We have this historical background against which the military began to build up services by the all-volunteer army post-Vietnam. So that's the history. And what happened post-Vietnam was there weren't enough men volunteering for the services. So leaders of the military, including Elmo Zumwalt, you may remember, the Admiral Navy, began to open up various jobs that women could then apply for and be able to be eligible to be serving in our armed forces. So in Gulf War I, early 90s, and I sometimes say that because I've got all the gray hair, but some people need the history lesson to sort of say, how long ago was this? I teach medical students a lot, and I have to talk to them about Vietnam is just like not in their realm of conversation. And Gulf War I, they only know something about because of Gulf War II. But in the 90s, we had about 11% women serving in the active duty forces. Today, in the entire active duty army, 14% are female. So obviously, when we think about our challenge for VA, we need to be prepared for the influx of women veterans. Right now, 5.5% of those who use VA are female, but we've got 14% in active duty, 17.6% in the Guard and Reserve. And the freshman class of the military, those who are going into the military today, in part because of the models of seeing that women can be a very important part of our armed forces. About 20% of the military freshman class is female. So we've got this tidal wave coming, and to be absolutely transparent, the VA has not been ready. I came into central office, as you heard, just a year ago, saying we got to be more, we got to take care of women, we got to beef up our services, women are invisible, we've got this 14% on our doorstep, and I've been running as fast as I can to revamp all of the services for women veterans. In about a third of the VA facilities, there is a comprehensive women's clinic. Any VA you walk into, you will get primary care. But we've made primary care very fragmented. You have to go over here for general primary care and then come back to get your birth control or your pap smear, or things that are women's health. It's not acceptable to us. And we have already changed policy, and we're sort of, as I said, running fast as we can to implement this nationwide. There are 153 medical facilities and over 900 community-based outpatient clinics that serve veterans. And so we have a tremendous task, but it's not one that is daunting. It's more of a sense of making sure that any woman who walks into any VA facility has someone who says, of course we can take care of you. We know about your service. We know that you are in combat. We know that you are carrying an M16. And we know that you need to be able to talk about all the things that have happened to you. Another mission that we have in the VA, in order to take care of all injured, all veterans, we also have a mission, I feel very strongly, is to determine the health effects of serving in the military. So that for many years we've done longitudinal studies, both on men and women, but not as many women were included. We do epidemiological studies. This is our first opportunity truly to be able to look at the health effects of military service on women's lives. And so we have launched a very large 60,000 person epi study that has already begun to collect subjects, and there are over 12,000 women will be sampled in that study. We're looking at reproductive health effects, we'll be looking at stress effects, cardiology, issues like musculoskeletal injuries, are these things different in men and women? And a lot of the things, we talk to focus groups of women, and many of the things that women voice concerns about, we want to make sure that we're looking at. So folks who are serving in various parts of the globe are concerned about toxic exposures. We're looking at that for both men and women. You know, in the past, you could look at embedded fragments and you knew the munitions, you knew what people made them of. So there was lead, and then we get into depleted uranium. Well, right now, all of these IEDs are made of almost any piece of garbage that you can pick up. And so you think about the long-term effects of unknown materials that are embedded in people's bodies, and that's one of the things the VA is paying special attention to. The differential effects of TBI, the differential effects of being exposed to stress. Does a man or a woman have a different experience of seeing someone killed, of seeing their buddies killed? What does that do to people? And we then have to add on the things that Kayla was just talking about. What is the role of the wife and mother? We do know a lot about folks coming back and saying, you know, I re-entered, I wanted to get back home. My husband and my kids immediately act as if I'm just back there, nothing has ever happened. And we talk about it as the laundry is literally piled up. No matter if you've been gone for a week or a year, it's as if you haven't been gone and they want you to just step in and be mom again. And so the woman says that she doesn't have the opportunity to even allow herself to think about what her effects might have been. So there's this kind of delayed timing where we often have to ask women who come for primary care appointments, just what sorts of things are you experiencing, what's it like for you? Have you had any time to have some downtime or adjustment, or do you have to just kind of keep it up because that's what your teenage kids want? We also are concerned about attachment issues. Attachment is really the bonding between mothers and children, which there's a lot, this is not to be discriminatory against men, there's a separate literature on attachment for men. But psychologists have known for years that there's special bonding and attachment between women and their children. And we have women telling us, and we have some effects in some of the children, that we need more and more information about. In other words, if their child is 6 months old and you go away for a year, what happens to you? What happens to your child? When you come back and maybe you weren't prepared for the fact that your child may not recognize you, attach to you, want to be held by you. They want to be held by the grandparent or the sister or whoever's been taking care of that child. And you think about any age of children, what this might do. You take a preteen, you can imagine the issues anyway for a preteen or early teenager, and then mom goes away for a year, what kind of hell everybody walks back into. And the families have a difficult time readjusting on their own. Much like we have some literature on alcoholic families where certain members of families take over and become the pseudo-parent. These are all things that we think Americans need to deal with, need to look at. And not to say that being away is a bad thing, but rather this is happening, and it's happening for significant numbers of women and men. And part of our job is to look at the effects of this for people and to prepare people for their return. Look at the adjustment issues. Think about things that people need to be able to be prepared for. Your role in coming here, obviously you're very interested. We want to be able to do a couple things. One is tell you that the VA is a very important part of women veterans' lives. 44% of those who serve in Iraq and Afghanistan enroll in VA care. That's double what any previous group has, and it continues to go up. Of that group that enroll, over half use us for between 2 and 10 times a year. So we know that women veterans need us, we know that our services are useful, and we have outreach materials that I've brought here so that you can take them with you and learn about all the things we do for women. We try and meet every need that women have. We have to sort of spell it out sometimes. We do infertility care, we do pregnancy care, we do all kinds of mental health care, from these adjustment and attachment kinds of things, support groups, peer groups, recovery programs. We have a lot of programs in education and in workforce issues. I should probably mention one of the workforce issues is, you can imagine being, and many of you, I shouldn't have to say you imagine, obviously there's women veterans in the room, but you have a position of some power. You have the person who's going into the bar knowing that they were a sergeant. What about the person who's a sergeant in charge of a whole group, or you're running an airport, or you're running a medical facility, and you step out of that role, you retire from the military, you resign your commission, you come back to the job that you had before. And how many places in the United States are women's jobs in the workplace much lower than men's jobs? And what happens to you when all of a sudden nobody respects even the fact that you have any rank at all, and you may not feel you have any rank at all? So what happens to you? And we hear a lot of people talking about irritability, losing it on the job, walking out of the job, feeling like the people around them just can't appreciate where they've been or who they are. And that's a really difficult thing in terms of anybody respecting what women do. Not only are you invisible when you're doing it, you're invisible when you come back, you're invisible as a veteran, and you go to your job and people have no idea. No idea. I was talking to a social worker this morning who was a captain, and she's treated just as a social worker. Nobody has a clue that she's currently a captain. You know, and people always already, we ask people about their rank when they serve, we ask them about what they did, because it's very important to appreciate everyone's jobs as members of the military, and making sure that we have some crossover in American society and we just don't have that yet. We simply don't have that, where anybody gets any credit for what they've done in the military. That wasn't exactly what I planned to say. I'm going to go ahead and move on now, because I think there'll be questions probably about what the VA can do and questions for Kayla, so I'm going to give a little more time to Joy and the policy issues.
Great.
Well, first, I'd just like to say I really appreciate for Tia to invite DAV here and to have an opportunity. I was so glad to see, as part of the conference, that you have a panel on women veterans. I think it's so important, as you mentioned even this morning, oftentimes we're part of a panel and there's one woman. But to really have a focus on these women veterans issues is so important today, given the changing rules. And as both Kayla and Dr. Hayes have articulated, things are changing. You know, we have these increasing numbers of women in the military today, the changing roles of women while they're in the military, and the increasing numbers of women that are coming to VA for care. Partly due, a lot, I think, to VA's outreach, that you really focused on OEF, OIF veterans and trying to reach out to them, including women veterans. And because this number is almost expected to double, I mean, we, of course, DAV and the other groups have been, the Veteran Service Organization have been very concerned about women veterans issues. DAV, as part of our grant, what we did was a Stand Up for Veterans campaign, which we developed. There were 4 key issues. One was VA budget health care reform, proper screening for TBI, access to mental health services, timely access to mental health services for OEF, OIF veterans with post-deployment mental health issues. and supportive caregiver issues. We really saw that was something that was lacking in terms of a benefit package for them, and to be able to support them in a better way to support our most seriously disabled veterans. And right away, the first thing that we did as part of our Stand Up for Vets campaign was a Stand Up for Women Vets campaign. We had the National Summit for Women Veterans, which comes once every 4 years. They hold them here in Washington, D.C. DAV has been very fortunate to be a co-sponsor of that event since the beginning, the inception of them, so there's been 3 now. So I said, I really want to do something special for women veterans, so we did a magazine, which was a collection of articles on women from all eras of service that have been disabled during service, since DAV focuses on disabled veterans. And one of the really fun things that we were able to do was put together a DVD focused on, to go hand in hand with the magazine. And it was interesting because the story that Keila told, one of my colleagues, a woman veteran, had said to me when she went out to give a talk or a speech somewhere, she asked the audience to close their eyes, and she said, imagine a disabled veteran. And then she said, now open your eyes, did you imagine me? And it relates to the story that you're talking about. So that's how we opened the DVD, and we were lucky to have Tammy Duckworth be in the DVD, Dawn Halfaker, Cece Mazak, and a number of other women veterans that have had some very serious disabilities as a result of their service in Iraq. So we put together this and a collection of other outreach materials that we're very proud of. One thing that was at the summit that was really an eye-opener, I'd never heard of it before. We work up here in DC, we work on women veterans issues, and I've done women veterans issues for DAV for the past 10 years, but Lioness was the name of the documentary. How many people have seen Lioness or heard of it, familiar with it? Just very briefly, Lioness was made by 2 women filmmakers that documented the service of 5 women who served in Iraq from 2003 to 2004. And those women came, their MOSs were supply clerks, mechanics, and support specialists, and they ended up being attached to Marine Combat Arms groups, going out, having to do in-home searches because of the laws that prevented men from touching Iraqi women or children. So they had to do these searches, and because of the nature of those searches, oftentimes they were ambushed, they had to fight their way out, they were exposed to combat in a number of ways throughout those missions. And I think Shannon and Rainey both did about 75 missions. And the astounding thing was, the first question I had as a service officer in me was, is this documented on your DD-214? Is this documented anyway in your military record? And we were so shocked to hear that no, and that some of them had not received their combat action badge. They were not able to prove that they had experienced combat, and as Kayla mentioned, some of, when they reached out to help, even within VA, there were some providers that said to them, I just can't accept that you were in combat. I mean, women don't serve in combat, and had no idea about the reality of the roles women are playing in Iraq today. And Lioness is just one example of that. I mean, our military police and a number of other MOSs, almost everyone over there, I mean, there's some exposure. So certainly the education piece is so key at this point to make sure that people understand. This Lioness documentary sparked some congressional interest. We had some members of Congress we talked to after, and I said, we really need to bring this to Capitol Hill, because we really want the staff to see, the congressional staff, and especially the House and Senate Veterans Affairs Committees, to really understand what the experience of women in the military is today and what needs we have. At the same time, we started working with Stephanie Herseth-Sandlin, Congresswoman from South Dakota, and Senator Patty Murray, Senator Patty Murray from Washington State, longtime advocate of women veterans issues. New Senator Herseth-Sandlin just jumped in. Both of them did some companion legislation to start addressing some of these issues, because we wanted VA to be able to have the resources and the ammunition to be able to do what they need to do to care for women veterans as they're returning. The 2 bills, so I gave you some handouts. One is just a little, what's on DAV's website, which is at www.dav.org. and our Legislative Action Center. There's a little alert on women veterans, and then there's a synopsis of the two bills, HR 1211 in the House and the Senate Bill S597. These include study of barriers for women veterans who are trying to access health care at VA, a comprehensive assessment of the women's health programs that currently exist in VA, medical care for newborn children of women veterans who are receiving either fee-based care or for maternity care, training and certification for mental health care providers at VA who are treating veterans suffering from sexual trauma and PTSD, and a pilot program for provision of child care assistance for veterans who are trying to access care for some, like very intensive mental health services or other medical appointments where it isn't really appropriate. They may not have child care services. The Senate bill, they're not exactly identical, but in addition, the Senate bill includes an independent study on the health consequences of women veterans who are serving in OEF, OIF, a report on the full-time program managers for VA. The secretary at the summit announced they would have a full-time program manager at every VA medical facility, something we've been fighting for a long time, so that was excellent news. So just a report on that. And pilot program on counseling and retreat settings for women veterans who've newly separated from armed forces, which have been mentioned, I think, by Kayla and Dr. Hayes in terms of the unique challenges women face as they return home and are expected just to resume their roles as wives, mothers, and often be caretakers as well. So we just, we've testified in the House and the Senate, Veterans Affairs Committee on both of these bills. There was no opposition from the veteran service community organizations, but we need your help. This is the second markup now, just coming up this week in the House. The bill has not been set for markup at this time. These bills were introduced last session. They got hung up in a political wrangling. They didn't get passed. They were reintroduced in the 111th session. And now, we've had hearings again on both bills, supported by the veterans community. We think they're good pieces of legislation. And so tomorrow, I understand that Chairman Filner is going to be here as part of a roundtable panel in the afternoon. And we really hope that, we can get that question to him in terms of, what are they going to do in terms of this legislation? We don't want it to languish. There's just a short window of opportunity to get these bills moving forward. I was very pleased at the new VA Secretary Shinseki, his remarks during his confirmation hearing. One of the things that he talked about was the priority of women veterans, and that within the military, he saw we have women in the service. We can take care of them. VA, we need to be up to speed on taking care of them as well. There should be there should be a continuum of service for them. So we were pleased by that, as well as he's just outgoing now, but the Undersecretary for Health, Dr. Kussman, has been a big advocate. And one of our biggest advocates is Dr. Hayes here. I must say, I've been up here in Washington 10 years doing women's health issues, and the couple years that since she's been here, we've started to see some real action, and she is a powerhouse up there. So I don't know how she's getting through, but anyway, she's making it move, and she's a mover and shaker up there. One of the other things that I handed out, this is really a VA document. It's the HSR&D Forum document. This, to me, is like my little Bible. I was so excited to see this, and Dr. Hayes is one of the writes one of the articles, the commentary on the opener. This is a accumulation of different VA research articles that are happening in VA, and I think it really gives you a good overview of what's really happening. She talks about the evolution of women's health services in VA, achieving equitable, high-quality care for women veterans. Another article is needs of women veterans must be carefully considered in building tomorrow's VA, PTSD in women veterans, ambulatory care among women veterans, access and utilization, and MST, including MST care for our newest generation of veterans. This research that's happening right now is absolutely critical, and it's making possible, I think, for Dr. Hayes to move forward in everyone's mind and bring the awareness and education piece up within VA, that this at every level within VHA care and needs to be addressed. The Lioness event, we were, very successful. I think there's about 88 seats in the House Veterans Affairs Committee room. We had about 150 people show up, which really made me feel very good in terms of that people are interested in women veterans issues. Staffers have been calling nonstop. So we brought the 4 of the 5 women that are featured in the Lioness documentary. We showed a shortened version of it, about 20 minutes. Then we had a panel discussion. And I think we had some really good discussion, and there was a pre-meeting over at VA and a panel with the women veterans as well. And then we did some, there was Patty Murray, Senator Murray did a press conference in the afternoon. So I think we're getting the attention that we need. There's been a hearing recently. I think, did you say you testified at it? Someone in the room. Carolyn, you testified at a hearing. I mean, these issues are coming to the forefront, but we're far from making sure that everyone really understands what, the changes that have occurred and what women experiences when they show up at the VA or they show up and tell someone they shouldn't be challenged on, what they did during military service. I mean, these things are known now. It's been going on for some time. And we don't want them to be put off and leave the system and not have the opportunity to utilize some of the very high quality care services that VA provides and very specialized services. So I just hope that you all take the opportunity to attend the roundtable tomorrow. If there's opportunities for you to, go on the website, develop your own letter, make calls, or send an email off. It's very easy to do, but it makes a big difference because we just really want to keep the pressure on and get these bills passed. So we'll open it up for questions, I guess.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. At this time, I want to invite Michelle Saunders to please join the panel. And to start the panel off, or start this question time off, I want to give Michelle just a couple minutes to introduce herself to all of you. Then we will have an open question session, and then at the end of the Q&A, I'd really like to give all the panelists time to have a final word and wrap it up that way. Michelle?
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Michelle Saunders. I served almost 10 years in the military, Army. Again, I was wounded in 2004. I spent 22 months rehabilitating at Walter Reed. And interestingly enough, I never, because I was an engineer, I was in a predominantly male job, I never wanted to separate myself as a woman because it was hard enough to get that point across that I was better than the guys and I had to be better than the guys. So to go back to saying that there were issues on the women's side of the house was very difficult for me because I was so used to saying, well, we're all green, we all bleed the same color, and that was the way it was. Until recently, it was about a year ago, my nephew was born, and I started having a lot of anxiety, and I couldn't understand what was going on, and I was going through a point where I wanted to have children, and I couldn't because I had made a pact with myself that I had to have 3 things. Basically, for me, I would have to be emotionally stable, mentally stable, and financially stable. And knowing that when we were in an ambush, I shot into women and children. I don't know if I actually killed women and children. I could guess that I may have. But knowing that I have that emotional anxiety and trying to bring a child into the world really hit me hard. And I never, ever put 2 and 2 together until he was born. So that's what brought me here today to talk about some of the women's issues, and obviously there are other things that we have to pay attention to, as our panelists have already said. So that's basically what brings me here today.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes.
One of the things I was really hoping you all might be able to talk about are the numbers, the really shocking numbers of how many women really are experiencing military sexual trauma. And obviously you're trying to move the entire VA system, Dr. Hayes, but this seems to me it's more than a women's health issue. It's just that women are bearing the brunt of this, just shocked to have this occur from a fellow service member.
I come from working in rape crisis center from the 70s. I worked in rape crisis for 10 years before I went into VA services. And so, unfortunately, I wasn't shocked at sexual trauma. Many people don't know that the rate of sexual trauma in the U.S. general population, the prevalence for sexual trauma is between 20 and 25%. When you think about things like date rape, you think about rape in all kinds of settings. But I never want to be in sort of like how shocking, because one of the things I've learned for a long time is that very thing, that the experience of sexual trauma in the military is different. That one does depend on the person next to you to take you back, to protect you. There's a sense of betrayal. There's also many other issues that are similar actually to incest situations. You can't get out of the situation, you can't leave, you can't just run away, you can't call mom, you can't call 911. There is a trapping 24-hour nature of the situation that makes all of it different. So I really think we have to pay attention to what do folks need. The other part I think that you really in some ways point to is that the culture of the military has to change. It is something that I actually know a certain amount about because I'm one of the DoD liaisons as to what the DoD is doing. And what the DoD in large part is focusing on is the men and having men be responsible for keeping women from sexual harassment and rape. And in our society, in many ways, that's what we have to stop rape in a number of ways. But the numbers are very high. Military sexual trauma, over all the years, the report is of 21.2% of the women and 1.1% of the men who've come to VA report that they've been seriously sexually harassed or assaulted while on duty in the military. The numbers for OEF, OIF right now are only at 17% in one group and 14% in a different group. VA doesn't take that as meaning that there's been a reduction, but rather it probably has a whole lot to do with the amount of time that it takes for someone to feel that they can trust someone enough to report. And so we're just saying those are the numbers right now, but we don't really know anything about what they mean. In addition, many women have sexual assault in their adult lives, either before they went in the military or after they went in the military. And so our challenge in the healthcare system and in the mental health care system is simply making sure that we ask men and women both about their experiences of sexual assault and making sure that we look to what they need, whether they say they need counseling right then, whether they don't need it, but we say to them, we're here. And if at some point it's something that you need to talk about, it's one of the factors of PTSD that you bring out is it's often things that you don't suspect are going to trigger. And having a child or being near a child are often things that people are really surprised at. It triggers PTSD. It triggers sexual assault PTSD. People feel like I'm never going to be able to protect my child from a future of sexual assault. So there are many triggers that take women by surprise that lead them to need the counseling for sexual assault. So it's a mixed answer, and it's a mixed answer saying VA is very clear. Every VA site has a military sexual trauma point of counseling. Every VA site has sexual trauma counseling available for men, for women, and VA is very active in working on effective treatments. I came from way back then. I thought there were only certain ways of long-term counseling, and VA actually has done some research work to show that there are two different methods, exposure therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy methods that actually show very good recovery in 10 to 12 sessions. And that's one of the reasons why we encourage people to come forward and get help, because actually we can help pretty quickly. And the effects of the therapy are very good. So I've learned a lot about what we do and what we are able to do in this type of treatment.
Yes, Amanda.
I have a question, sort of an opinion question. I'm looking to do a story right now on female veterans, and I have to say, I was telling Michelle this earlier, when we do the male stories, they're very fraternal. I talked to one of you, I talked to 30 of the men. To find the women has been impossible. You don't talk, like, it's not like y'all don't talk in the same way that these, or you're invisible. I can't find you. And I mean, I'm going out there, I've just now found the AWV, but honestly, your voices aren't really being that loud right now. How, is it societal not listening, or do you think you're not talking? Because I'm looking, so.
Well, I think again, what we talked about this morning and what I just talked about, for me personally, I was in a predominantly male unit. And again, I fought long and hard to get that, I guess, that little badge that I had. But if you think about it, just by even the military creating a combat action badge. Now, we're in a war it's an urban war. There's no, you don't know who the enemy is. And to have a combat action badge to say that you were in combat is a little bit ridiculous. And normally, it only goes to infantry, it only goes to demolition teams and stuff like that. But the reality is that, and for me, I know that a lot of times when I went, for instance, when I was at Walter Reed, we'd have outings. And a lot of the times, they would introduce the wounded soldiers, and everybody would come up to the guys and shake their hand, and they would just be sitting there looking at me. And if it wasn't for my comrades to say, hey, you know what, she got a Purple Heart, she was wounded, she was in action, they would have never even recognized me. And so I think that for us, it almost puts us in a corner where we're like, okay, well, I kind of want to raise my hand, but I don't. And another woman had said that to me this morning. She said, when they asked to announce who the veterans were to please stand up, she's like, I felt out of place. And so I think that's part of for us, it's a little bit of, I mean, and I know everybody here can piggyback on that, but I think that's a big part of it, where it's different. It's not the norm than what we're used to, I guess, in other wars. So
it's funny you say that. When I go places with my husband, and people will go up to him and shake his hand and say thank you for your service,
Mm-hmm.
and I just stand there looking irritated. And he's very good. He always says, like, this is my wife, she served too. Like, we met in Iraq. But part of the issue, I think, can be that women are, I don't really believe in essentialist natures necessarily, but I think women are socialized from a very young age in this country to not be too pushy and to not brag. And it's hard to break that. It's hard to come out and say, here I am, look at me, pay attention to me. And that's a challenge. There are, women veteran groups that are getting started, but also I do think from what I've read, women veterans are less likely to self-identify as veterans. And just one of the things that I mentioned, I want women veterans to change that, to start self-identifying as veterans. And I had my own moment. It took years after I got back for me to think of myself as a veteran and not just as a chick who went to war. Like, I'm a vet. And I'm hoping that that's going to change as women are more vocal and put themselves out there more and can serve as examples. And we have great women like Tammy Duckworth who are very visible in the public eye that can help bring that attention and shift it through time. But I'm certainly happy to help put you in touch with plenty of great women that I've served with. And again, though, as I mentioned, there are women who've had such traumatic experiences and are not ready to go through it, that they aren't ready to be public, to be visible. And since there are so many fewer of us as a percentage and in real terms, that makes it even more challenging.
One thing I would mention too, because I've come across so many of them in working on this caregiver legislation, and Kayla brought the fact out, and I've seen this a number of times. It's very interesting. I mean, we'll be talking to the spouse, and it's generally a woman, and they will be talking about their needs as what they need as a caregiver and what could be helpful. And it won't be until like weeks and weeks after we've talked, and then they'll say something and I realized, I said, you were in the military. Oh yeah, I was. And there's a lot of these dual, both are serving or have served together, and they don't mention it like through long periods of time or self-identify as a veteran. So it's
been forever. I used to go out to VFWs and out in the field and ask the guys, was your wife in the military? Trying to find the women veterans, and that's part of how we did it, because the women do not easily come forward. It's a true challenge for us.
Next question in the back.
Hi, I'm Michelle Wilmot, and I served 8 years in the U.S. Army as both a medic and a mental health counselor. I served a year in Ramadi, Iraq between 04 and 05. And I also served on Team Lioness, actually the group after the ones in the documentary. There's a picture flash, I get like 15 seconds or so. But I fought hard against my combat stress unit, which I was attached to, against fraud, waste, abuse, malpractice, particularly with the mixed diagnosing of personality disorders to get people shuffled out the door, and harassment for my religion, my ethnicity, and being a pushy woman, basically. My issue is with minority female vets. and how we have an increased sense of invisibility. I think anytime I've tried to address it with anybody in the military, they minimize the problem or they are embarrassed to even take on it altogether because it's such a taboo subject to talk about racial issues and whatnot. And also having your identity questioned, not only as a veteran, but as an American is another issue. And my question for you is, well, to the whole panel is, how does somebody like me, considering the aforementioned issues, actually go about being heard and getting a response from different VSOs, veterans advocates, because I've had a hell of a time.
Well, one thing I would mention, are you aware of the VA Advisory Committee on Minority Veterans? Have you heard of that?
But the thing is, people like me, and I've met other people who had similar problems, not only in Iraq, but in other parts of their military career, is that we don't believe that anybody will take us seriously. And that they'll want to minimize our problems. They want to minimize, like, oh, well, you know, since you're a minority, you're just sensitive to everything. And, you know, just don't worry about it. They didn't mean it. They're just ignorant. And the excuses all go to the offender.
This is the one thing I've learned, and it's not just with being a woman, but it can be applicable to anything. It's like flying a kite. You get a gust of wind and you go with it, and there's times where it's going to just bomb dive and hit the ground. You just got to get back up and do it again. If you're passionate about what you want to do and that message that you want to get across, as many times as you're told no, the answer is always going to be no until you ask. So you got to continue just to pound it through and trust that somebody out there is going to be able to pick up that ball and run with it. So that's.
For what it's worth, you can also try pushing the statistics. The military as a whole is fairly diverse, but among the female population in the military, white women are actually minority. Minority women actually outnumber white women. So push that, you know, be like, you know what, we're not invisible, we are the majority.
And get louder, that's what I always
Yes,
do.
that's close. We actually, one of the things we're very concerned about is that the data in the VA has not been run by racial and ethnic subgroups in the past, and the Center for Minority Veterans we've been working with them. We think that there are concerns about how we serve minority women and minority men in terms of the disparities in care. We're very much interested in, and we know that in the OEF population, almost 26% of the population is African American women. Of men, it's only 13.5%. Hispanic is almost even, just over 9% men and women. We have a list of 25 other racial subgroups that we know of in the OEF group. So we at the VA we're looking at the health issues by subgroup of race and gender because we really think it has an impact. We already know that health in America is different by your color, by your race, by your ethnic, cultural issues, and the fact that it's difficult to figure it out doesn't mean that we haven't been very committed to looking at these issues, and we're tracking it going forward.
Did they deny you your malaria meds? I thought that was so creepy. Does everybody know that if you weren't in the military? So there's a certain medicine for like malaria after your regular, I can't remember which one it was, but at the end, the one that kills the like eggs or whatever creepy thing. So it's only for people with from a lot of different ethnic groups aren't allowed to have it. Like pretty much only white people get it, and I always thought that was the
I wasn't given malaria pills.
So yeah, I just thought that was funny.
So
Not funny,
it's
haha.
it's a combined issue for DoD, and in fact DoD and VA are separate, but DoD does do some racial typing in the data, which VA has not had, not until recently did VA have access to that, and are somewhat more accurate. There's many issues. I'd be happy to talk with people about that. It's a huge issue for us.
Yes.
Dr. Hayes, we heard stories about doctors of the VA not willing to believe that a female vet was in combat. Two separate stories. One, that's completely wrong. The examiner should have been told by the VA whether or not the veteran was in, combat. How can we cut that out? You're in charge of some of that. Can't we insist that when the VA sets up an exam for PTSD, that the regional office tell the VAMC, whether or not they bought into the fact that the veteran was in actual combat? This is not for any doctor, that's for the RO to decide.
You've raised many issues. Some are legally about benefit claims, and I can't speak to the VBA. You've pointed out an essential, huge issue, which is people not being believed when they come and tell anyone what they've done in combat. On my side, what we did, we actually acquired 2 copies of the Lioness film for every VA. I've worked very hard with our Women Veteran Program Manager to make sure people are watching the Lioness film and raising those questions and being able to tell people. One is you could tell someone, unless they see pictures of it, unless they hear stories of it, some people just aren't going to be convinced, no matter what's on paper.
Well, we've won several CIAVC, cases on this, issue, and it just seems that
Joy
it
can
just
speak
keeps
more
on
to the
going
legal
on.
piece. The problem is it's not on the DD-214.
Exactly, and like in some of these cases of women that were in the Lioness, there is no documentation that indicates they were even officially in a Lioness program.
But you can prove it several other
Right,
ways,
right,
and we
yes,
have.
Right.
Yes, and so, this is the challenge, but we're trying right now to work both the Armed Services side, this is a DOD issue, and also for DOD to share that information with VA, because then that makes it much simpler for them in terms of not having to do, get buddy statements, produce a documentary, do something like that
To prove it.
But they shouldn't even set up an exam until they resolve that issue. It's not for the doctor.
Right.
We see that with male vets too, who have that
I want to tell you the
problem.
problem goes beyond that, and what part of what they're speaking to. The Lioness folks, it was when they walked into a vet center. Now, the fact that that was a couple of years ago doesn't excuse the fact that we need to catch up. We need to let everybody know what it means to serve in these deployments right now, and whether you're male or female, but particularly for the women, because there's just too many people who served way back when in their father's military who are staffing some of those positions and haven't been educated, haven't been sensitized to what it is that we're asking our women to do.
And I also think that this speaks to the problem that came up several times on this morning's Veterans panel, which is the lack of seamless transition from DOD to VA. And the fact that you have to literally hand carry pieces of paper and physically put them into somebody's hand and hope that they don't get lost. And that's that problem, that's a systemic problem that has to be addressed at a much higher level to try to make that transition seamless, to make sure those records are electronic and smooth and travel with the veteran as they move from the DoD system to the VA system.
And within the VA, there's something about being more inclusive of women. We continue, unfortunately, to put out things like posters that have only male pictures on them. I go after everything that I see the VA put out. I'm talking about a reputation that I'm getting. But literally, we had a Veterans Day poster out last year that had everybody in shadow, but I can't pick out a woman in that picture. And until we are making women more visible and putting women in their combat gear on pictures that are VA saying we take care of veterans, until we continue, and I do it with all the materials that I put out, but until we do that, we're not going to make more of an inroad with that person. So it's the first person at the door, it's the clerk, it's the person parking the car, and it's the doctor who's doing the exam. We have to do it across the board, and we're working really hard on it. We've put out videos, we put out, like I say, part of why I want my Women Veteran Program Managers to go meet all those people and say, let's sit down and have a showing of this video, at least the first half hour of it, is to show you what it looks like when women are serving today.
Well, in addition to that, it goes hand in hand with the whole PTSD thing. I mean, if you're physically wounded, somebody can see that and identify that right away. But if you have PTSD, which I don't care who you are, if you've gone over there and you've sat there and you've taken in everything that's going on, there's something wrong with you, and you're going to bring it home with you. Not to say that it can't be fixed, but you're going to have residual effects of that. People always assume that, if you think about it, there's somebody by an amputee or somebody who's been visibly wounded 24/7 by their bedside. If somebody hasn't been, quote unquote, physically wounded, but they may have carried somebody out on their back, or they may have seen one of their friends get completely blown to shreds, how are you going to prove that? And people forget that all the time. And it's the same thing when wounded veterans are trying to get jobs. There's a lot of companies out there that say, well, I want to hire a wounded veteran. It has to be a guy, visibly wounded. And it blows my mind, but it's the same thing. If we can't get our military leader or our senior leadership to come out and say, you know what, it is an issue, and it's okay to have issues with it. It's okay to be upset about it. It's okay to talk about it. Until those things happen, we're still going to continue to fight the same fight. So it's that invisible wound, the same with men and women.
I want to get over here to Derek.
I just had a quick question. You mentioned a couple times outreach for women. Where can I write down where, because women ask, why women veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, where can I send them? What website, what group, where can I, for
There's
collaboration?
Team Lioness on Facebook.
Say again?
There's Team Lioness on Facebook.
But that's for the.
Right, if you mean for VA care, did you mean to reach other women's groups?
Like
American
other
Women's
women veterans that are in need of support, to get engaged, to reach out. You mentioned it a couple, I don't know, to see where I could.
Well, I'll speak more to those that I'm personally familiar with, and I'm sure that there are others. I'm on, and this is a broader veterans organization, but Community of Veterans. I'm on that website. There are other women there, and I'm on the board of directors of an organization that's going to kick off very soon called Grace After Fire, that's going to provide an online community specifically for women veterans, which I'm hoping will be very successful. On Facebook, you have the Lioness group is on Facebook. Also, American Women Veterans is a new group that has a strong Facebook presence. They have several hundred members already, and I'm very excited to note they are in the process of organizing their first 3 women veteran-only outward bound trips. And those are going to be completely free. I don't remember how that's being funded, but Outward Bound is doing veterans trips in general that are all free, and there's some that are specifically for women veterans, which I think is a really exciting opportunity and can be really great. It's tough because, as I mentioned this morning, there is suddenly this proliferation of services, this proliferation of organizations that are available, and trying to get the right one, or trying to get them to line up together and have a unified front so that you have one place to go instead of having 20 small places to go. That's an ongoing challenge that I really hope that CIAV can help to tackle, so that we can have, make it easier for women to find a place to go and for other people to find women when they want to be able to reach out and offer services to them. Hopefully I'll be able to answer that better, over the coming years.
And I did bring lots of my brochures, and this answers a lot of questions about what we do for women veterans. There's a number of website links in here about depending on what people want. So I encourage you to take as many as you want, and contact me for more if I didn't bring enough.
Is there a push to put women in the vet centers?
There are women in the vet centers, and there are a number of OEF vet counseling links that have been now hired. And we talked to the vet centers a lot about this issue, and yes, there are already both men and women, young men and women who've recently served.
Also, any of you are welcome to contact me, and I'll hook you up with tons of women veteran resources. Yes.
This is just curious. I have 2 nieces, one still on active duty and one recently medically discharged. I've been surprised at the number of cardiac problems that these kids are having coming back from Iraq. And maybe it's just an adverse selection because she was at Fort Meade and one of her best friends dropped over dead from heart problems. She's had heart problems, back problems. I know she's been monitoring satellites and carrying heavy equipment. Our vet center guy said that a lot of that may be related to PTSD. But I'm just, among the group that she has hung out with since she returned, lots of 22 and 23-year-olds with cardiac problems.
I'd be really interested, because I will follow up, but we have not had a spike at all in cardiac problems in young women. But I certainly would like to get it. And by spike, we keep a surveillance on these things. We have computer checks for, that's the nice thing about electronic medical records, for the various diagnoses and what women are experiencing. And so I'd be very interested in taking a look at what's going on.
Okay,
And it could be.
I'm going to see her this weekend. So.
Yeah, well, I never discount that it could be a specific unit or a specific exposure or certain kinds of treatment or whatever. So I'd be very much interested in looking into it.
Question over here.
I wanted to have a comment and then a question. Just to make the link between what you were saying about not being believed, I mean, one of the hallmarks of re-traumatization with PTSD is either a minimization of the initial event or we're talking about outright disbelief. So the risk there And I was wondering, are there any numbers yet about the numbers of women returning with PTSD versus male veterans?
There are, I'm sorry, I don't have them with me.
I don't have them handy either, but I do know that there is
In the forum document, you understand?
Okay, thank you.
There's an article on that.
there is a slightly higher incidence of PTSD among the female
Right.
veteran population, and I think researchers are still trying to tease out all the reasons for that. But there is a slight, and among certain other things, exposure to combat trauma is positively correlated with
Right.
PTSD, and female and I think Hispanic is positively
Yes.
correlated. So there's several other things,
Hispanics are
and
more
teasing out all the
vulnerable.
details of the whys and then what to do about it could be interesting.
Yeah, the article is PTSD in women veterans,
Thank
so
you.
there's some.
And we
good
do know that
information.
women are more vulnerable to development of PTSD after exposure to certain stressors, including sexual trauma and the combined sexual trauma and combat, and or a personal history of sexual trauma before military service, which is extremely common, as is common in the U.S. population. So.
Dr. Hayes and Joy, since you brought it up, could we talk about combined combat trauma and sexual trauma? Some people refer to it as a double whammy, and I know several people, including Tom Berger, have been speaking out about how there's very few clinicians that are trained to take care of a client who has both, and it's kind of a new cohort. So I wondered if you could speak to this, this new cohort of veterans that have both types of trauma.
Sure. Again, I think that it is an issue that is being identified and needs to be identified now. I personally don't think it's a brand new issue, unfortunately. The Vietnam women were very much subjected to incredible trauma of being medics and being sexually harassed and assaulted at the same time. I think the issue is really, I don't know, we have not had a problem with, quotes, having enough therapists trained to do both. And we do have some excellent sites which are, they're not inpatient, they are residential, where you can go stay in a safe house and go to a group of women only. Palo Alto is one of them, where we do combined treatment of combat and sexual trauma issues. I think probably what's new is really more that women are talking more about their combat traumas. And in conjunction, it is the double whammy in that the more trauma that you are exposed to, the higher reaction you're going to have. Essentially, the more PTSD, the more severe the symptoms, the more difficult some of the therapy might be to experience. And so obviously we need some very sensitized and special therapists for that. There aren't these same therapists in every outpatient clinic or in every hospital. I'm not sure what we're going to do about that particular need. That's really a challenge for mental health. But we do, more than half of the therapists are female. The men are requesting women therapists. The women who are doing this treatment are learning and are very interested in doing this treatment. So it's sort of an evolving thing where more women are coming forward and saying, I had these experiences as you're describing, where you had to do a lot of things because you were more, and it's a fairly high level exposure to sexual assault and sexual harassment, and they're combined. I can't really answer your question other than it's not an unknown for the VA, and we certainly are continuing to look at it. We have no waiting lists for the treatment centers that we have. The difficulty, of course, is we don't have them everywhere, and you basically have to arrange your life to be able to leave your family, partner, children, to take time out to get better. So it's a mixed kind of issue in terms of going to Florida or California. But we do pay for that travel, and we try and help people arrange what they need to arrange to do that.
Thank you.
And I would just add to that, I guess, the thing we have to make sure is that the VA has the resources to have the specialized centers that they need through the National Center for PTSD. And I know that they're doing some work with these veterans that have the dual diagnosis. And we just have to make sure if there are barriers to getting that care, we have to find out why, and then we have to overcome them in terms of making sure, whatever they are, that we can address that, because they deserve these issues to be taken care of, and whatever it takes.
And one of the hidden parts is, if we're talking about women veterans, this is not a gender-only issue.
Right.
I think that for many, many years, no one wants to talk about males being assaulted in the military. But certainly double whammy.
And if I can just touch very briefly on that from a more personal note, I think for most women in the military, sexual harassment in some form is fairly chronic and widespread. Whether or not you consider that a problem can vary person to person and situation to situation. I know when I was over there, I had watching the way that the guys interacted with each other, which I considered like watching males in their natural habitat. They started treating me the exact same way they were treating one another. I did not frame that immediately as sexual harassment. I was just being treated the way they treated each other. And then at one point, there was a situation where in the middle of the night, changing of guard shift, a male soldier that I served with pulled out his penis and grabbed my hand and tried to put my hand on it. And I didn't necessarily feel that I was in a lot of danger. I mean, I did have a rifle. But it wasn't until maybe last year or within the past 6 months that somebody said, technically that counts as sexual assault. I mean, there was, his penis was involved and unwanted physical contact, and that falls under the larger rubric of military sexual trauma. But I'd never framed it that way to myself, ever. It was just this guy crossed the line, he did something totally out of line. Like, I followed up, I dealt with it, I filed a written report for him to have in his current record, and I dealt with his chain of command to get him moved, and da-da-da-da-da. So I never self-identified as being a victim because I didn't really necessarily feel victimized, and I think that can complicate it. What I can tell you is that for me, what he did, it pissed me off, but I could cope with it. The thing that I found more upsetting was that when I was trying to get it dealt with by approaching his chain of command and trying to pursue it to make sure that he wasn't going to be able to do that again or make sure that it was in some way recorded, was the way that I was treated by my peers, by his peers, is why would you want to ruin some man's career just because you can't handle it? And that was the much deeper sense of betrayal and frustration that was much, much harder to get over for me. In addition to that was this moment in my deployment when I became convinced that if I were friendly and outgoing and nice, everybody would perceive that as an invitation to more than friendship and would consider me a slut. And I had to choose this other path of being very reserved and cold and professional and insist on being treated with dignity and respect all the time and be called a bitch. And this whole I can either be a bitch or a slut. Those are the only roles available to me. Somebody pointed out later, absolutely true, that the third role you can have as a military woman is the dyke. You can be a bitch, a slut, or a dyke. And really that sense of being limited to those few roles, that was very frustrating and limiting and challenging for me. And it's taken a long time to still try to feel like I can forge a new path for myself where I can be friendly and outgoing and nice to people and still ask to be treated with professionalism and respect, that I can have a more complex role. And I think that can be one of the more challenging issues of dealing with sexual harassment, whether or not you consider mine to board or to verge into actual sexual assault. And whether how we define things may also play into how we report things. Like, I've been to the VA, but I never would have considered reporting to the VA that I was, in any way sexual assault because I never framed it that way for myself.
One last question, and then I want to give the panelists a chance to give their final thoughts.
This is the question, I just have to follow up on that because I'm old enough.
I'm sorry.
So that I came up through the women's movement when I was, in most cases, the only women in an all-male management team. That's the same kind of behavior I went through then, which is you're either a slut or you're the bitch, and you've got to almost behave as if you're asexual or non-sexual and like a man to avoid the other one. So I think that,
yeah, I don't think
and
women
I'm not
in the military
denigrating the
experience
veteran
any. No, I think that women. I always say to people, women. The military is made up of people, regular Americans. So I don't think that what I went through is different from what other American women went through. It's just perhaps a more intense environment because of the proportions. But it's very similar to women journalists that I've talked to, women scientists that I've talked to. It's an across the board experience in a lot of ways. At least in the military, we got paid the same.
But the challenge is figuring out, how much of that is kind of a reasonably acceptable price you pay for being a change agent, being the first woman in an all-male environment, and where the line gets. Where's the line, and when does it get crossed? And and the other part of it that's really hard is if you object, you get penalized.
And I think you can't minimize the fact of what happens to your whole physical system when you're protecting yourself from it 24 hours a day. I mean, in a job, you can sometimes go home and talk to other people, but when you're out there, out somewhere, you're not even with a tent or anything, nothing to protect you or any sense of protection.
No, I was not trying to.
No, I'm just saying that there's a sense of physicality to the anxiety or the stress that locks you in, that really is very constant. And whether the sexual stuff comes first or the other experiences come first, I think they just sort of all pile on top of each other. And we know some of what happens when people's adrenaline and anxiety is just locked into that for 24 hours a day. It's not a good outcome.
And also, one of the things that we have to keep in mind too is that the big scandal that broke out of Aberdeen, 10 years ago, 8 or 10 years ago, the military is so afraid now because they're under such a microscope that, like, I had an incident where I actually walked in and saw a male soldier forcing himself on a female soldier. And thinking that I was doing the right thing, I went forward, went to the chain of command, said I'd like to file a suit. Come to find out, there were 6 of us against the same person. And at the time, this was pre-war time. I was an all-Army athlete. I was, at the top of my game, I guess, if you will, in the military, and never had an issue with PT. It was always a PT stud, this, that, and the other thing. And then all of a sudden, when it was time to go in front of a court-martial, it was almost like I was being, like, they were just completely ripping my character apart. And all I did was witness something. But the point was they just wanted to shove it under the rug because they didn't want that exposure. And now, especially with the exposure that Walter Reed got, the last thing they want to do is come forward and say, yeah, we're having an issue with, military sexual trauma again. So it's almost like you get to a point where you're just like, you know what, I'm just going to deal with it and get over it. And a lot of women, unfortunately, have that mentality because they know that their character's just going to be torn to shreds if they even try to come forward. So again, it goes back to that senior leadership and trying to get things changed.
I totally agree that command climate can have a lot to do with it.
Absolutely.
One of the other things that I'm concerned about, and I think Tia is the expert and can probably talk a lot more about this, but that military sexual trauma is also a retention issue.
Mm-hmm.
You lose women, soldiers, service members. I was in the Army, it's such a bad habit to say soldiers. And I'm not an expert in sexual assault, but somebody that I met recently who is told me that the statistics out there show that the vast majority of rapists are repeat offenders, rape at least 10 times. So we're talking about, the military is afraid of losing personnel. We hear these stories about men who have been accused of sexual assault just being kind of sent somewhere else, just shift to a different unit. And I think it's important that one approach that we could consider trying is to make sure that the senior levels of leadership within the military understand that if we're looking at this as a retention issue, you can have this one male, you can have 10 or more females. Mm-hmm. And that's one way that we might try to address that and get people at the higher levels to tackle this as a real retention problem.
We're rapidly running out of time, so I'd like to give everybody else on the panel just a minute or two to give a final thought, if anybody has any final thoughts.
I'm going to say 2 quick things in terms of final thoughts. One is that kind of tagging on to the MST issue, Plan B, also known as the morning after pill, I think it's important that we encourage that to be part of the basic formulary of any pharmacy. If a woman is sexually assaulted, that she not be doubly victimized by not having access to this immediate pregnancy prevention. It is not currently part of the military's basic care formulary, and it should be. So I think that's something that we can do. I don't know anything about the VA and whether that's part of the, okay. So I think that's an important thing that we can consider pushing for that would help female service members as well as military spouses who are overseas on accompanied tours. And then the last thing I want to say, I think that it's important for me to close on. I'm happy to speak about and identify problems and challenges that women within the military and in the VA system face, but I also want to point out that I am so proud of my service and that despite the challenges and the struggles that I faced, I found my military service incredibly empowering and really overall a very, very positive experience. And when I'm talking about the things that we can change, it's from a position of love for the military and absolute respect for what all of our service members go through and wanting to make that a better experience for everyone. And I'm willing to acknowledge the challenges, but I also want to point out that we have made a lot of progress and we are definitely moving in the right direction. And military service, though it can have its challenges, especially for women, can still be a really great thing for so many of us. Thank you.
I would just say, again, it's a great opportunity to be on this panel. Thank you so much for putting that together. And it really acts as the agent for change. And women just want to have their experience be recognized and to be treated, with dignity, and to know that their service was appreciated. So I think we can all help in doing that, whatever our roles are, and to further that.
And just to echo what everyone else said, thank you for the opportunity to speak and just continue to promote awareness. What we're doing here today is what's working.
I really want to thank the panelists for their time today, and thank you all so much for being interested in women veterans issues. It definitely means a lot to us. Thank you.